What's up, YouTube? It's Joe Catchpolia sitting on the couch, making some money, investing in fractional real estate online, as usual. Today, I'm going to keep going with the theme of sort of what I was doing yesterday, as far as just I'm going to talk a little bit about a general real estate concept that I think it's impacting quite a few of my fractional real estate investments, and so I wanted to just kind of dig into it a little bit more. I've talked about it quite a bit, and that concept's going to be co-living or rent by the room properties. Um, I often refer to this as a pad split style rental, although there's definitely some nuance in the space. I'm certainly not, the foremost expert in this type of investing. It's relatively new. It's something. I mean, I say that in its current iteration, it's relatively new. For a very long time, there's been boarding houses, which is, I think, the closest comparison. Over time, a lot of cities have outlawed boarding houses, and they have um, rules against it. And so uh, now we're seeing, like, especially pad split is using technology and some new types of agreements, and as a way to sort of get around those rules and do certain things. But I'm not going to dig into the weeds that much about it. I just want to talk a little bit about what it is, why we're seeing a lot more demand for it, why we're seeing some more supply for it, where what are the rewards to us as investors, and then also, does it create any additional risk? So, to give you a couple examples of these properties, ones that I've bought that I've done some videos on here, on Moguls, that's where I'm on the site here. I bought pieces of the Victor, the Mafi, and the Rhodes. All of these are, true pad split style, managed by pad split. Um, and like I said, I'm gonna dig into why that's a little bit different from just the regular co-living. They also had the Prince. I didn't buy that one. But also, I'm invested in some on Lofty as well. And the reason that I thought about talking about this today is there's going to be an upcoming vote. This property, I don't know if you remember when I did this original video, it's just a fourplex, all long-term rentals. One of the units is vacant. Earl just recently took over management of this. If you don't know who he is, jump in the Lofty Discord and ask any question, and you'll meet him pretty quickly. Um, one of the best co-owners and people running properties on that site, as far as I'm concerned. And so I actually didn't buy into this one initially, but once he took over managing it, I bought a couple of tokens. Not a whole lot yet, but I think that I'll buy more. Um, but so he recently mentioned he's going to, if it doesn't rent up quickly, the vacant unit, he'll furnish it and do a by the room rental. But we'll need to. He's going to propose a vote to make sure that he has the right to do that as far as the co-owners are concerned. All the other investors in the DAO. But so we had a little bit of a discussion in that Discord about what are the costs to the DAO of it, what are the risks and whatnot. But it made me realize, like, a lot of people, this is sort of a new concept for them. I've had clients doing this for a while, but no, not any that are that it's their main business model. One of the agents on my team actually just bought himself a property that he's going to do this with, and so I think going forward, okay, so why is this a trend? Well, I just pulled up. This is you can find hundreds, if not thousands, of articles about housing affordability in the U.S. getting worse. This is it's a year old article, but it's one that I found right away. Um, and it really just lets you see what's going on here. So this is showing, the percent of households at different income levels that are spending more than 30% of their income on housing. And you can see, like, just in this short period of time, there's a really drastic increase, especially in people making less money. The lower income levels are just getting, having an extreme rent burden. So it's getting harder and harder to rent homes. And so, you know, you've seen a lot of people come up with different solutions for this. Many of them are having, multi-generational housing where they're having people staying at home longer, people moving in with their kids when they get older, like all sorts of solutions like that. You even see some of the builders building new homes with that in mind, where Lennar has something that I don't remember exactly what they call it, but it's specifically made for that, where they have this separate little suite for either your kids to stay or your parents, depending on how you're handling that, or really anybody. But I mean, that's their intention. But aside from that, you're seeing a lot of landlords offering to rent individual rooms, and a lot of people can't afford a whole apartment, but they might be able to afford a room with room, and it's really common. People used to just do that with roommates, but in certain areas, maybe you don't have for whatever reason you can't find that. That's where a lot of these rent by the room homes are starting to pop up. Especially, you see it the most in the markets that have the least affordability. And so, that's one thing you want to, when you're thinking about, investing in this model, you have to really think about, well, is there a need in this market, right? There are certain markets where, you can rent a single family home for, what would be very affordable to the average worker. There's less and less of those places all the time, but it is, they do still exist. So, mostly urban areas, definitely coastal urban areas. Um, so that's where you see a lot of demand. So why are we getting more supply though, right? Like it seems like a lot of work for landlords. You have to buy furniture, you have to uh, rent, you have to deal with multiple tenants, not just one lease for your whole house. Um, and there's a couple of reasons. One, once interest rates went up a few years ago, um, we saw investors just really looking for, excuse me, any opportunity to increase the cash flow in their properties. Because it's, if you're a real estate investor and you own a single family, and you were in the process of buying single family rentals, or you continue to invest in those, um, traditional rentals are a money losing proposition in a lot of markets when you compare the rents to the current prices and the interest rates. And so you see a lot less people buying long term rentals. A lot of them shifted to short term rentals, and that boom happened much earlier than this rent by the room boom. But that was, and that still works in a lot of markets. I talk about that a lot. You've seen me pick up fractions of properties of STRs on Mogul, on Lofty, on lots of other places. Which reminds me, before I forget, please like and subscribe. In the description to this video, I've got a link. I have links to all the places where I'm currently investing in fractional real estate. Some of them will give you some free money, some of them won't. Read their terms and conditions. I think the link right now says Lofty's, gives you a $50 credit. Uh, I believe they're going to honor that in the future, but at the moment you're not actually able to get that credit or use it. Um, but do your own due diligence on both the sites and the investments. Just because I buy some of them doesn't mean that you should, or just because I pass them up doesn't mean necessarily you should as well, right? And there's also a link to our Discord where a bunch of us just talk about general fractional real estate investing on a bunch of different platforms. Okay. Uh, Sorry for that aside. I just always forget to say that at the, until the end. And so I'm glad I actually got it now. But so, why, so investors are mostly doing it because, um, one, in some markets, it's getting harder to rent units so some markets rental prices have actually gone down. Some markets it's just harder to find a well qualified tenant, like a tenant that makes enough money to qualify for what your rent is today. But also too, it's just they've realized there is a demand for this. And you can get, typically, if you were renting, if you have a 3 bedroom home and you rent it by the bedroom, you're going to get a significant amount more in rent than if you rent it as, just as the total unit. Um, I think this is a good time to talk a little bit about, how pad split differs from just the traditional model. So that, what I described, that's co-living, right? You have a 3 bedroom home, you rent out the 3 bedrooms. There still has, adequate living space for everybody. Pad split does things a little bit different. Uh, so let's say, okay, this is a 4 bedroom, 3 bathroom home. If you were just a traditional person doing this, you'd have 4 bedrooms to rent. Well, pad split actually, and they even have this nice thing. They take any common areas possible, split them off, and create extra bedrooms. So you can see, okay, here we have 4 bedrooms. After they do this, They took this empty space in the middle and created two bedrooms. They took the dining room and created another bedroom. And so, oops, what's happened? That's yeah, the empty space in the middle, this dining room. And so now all of a sudden they have a 7 bedroom, 3 bathroom home. They don't convert the kitchen, right? They leave the kitchen so you can have space to cook. A lot of times people will add bathrooms, but if there's enough bathrooms, they don't do that. And so if I say a pad split style home, this is really what I'm thinking about. It's they've gotten rid of everything except for bedrooms in the kitchen, maybe a laundry room, definitely bathrooms. And so it is not, it's definitely they're focused on providing the absolute cheapest units possible, right? Like if you have no common areas, you have a lot of their properties are just not the nicest finishes and whatnot. Although you're starting to see some of these investors provide a little bit nicer units, but still just creating a whole bunch of bedrooms. And so that's sort of the distinction between just like a traditional rent by the bedroom or co-living model and what Pad Split's really trying to do. I mean, they're just maximizing the income of the units. Um, and so, by doing this, right? Like, okay, before I said if you rent out the 3 bedrooms separately, you might make more money than if you rent out the whole home. But okay, and I should have been using 4 because Pad Split's example here is 4, right? But if you go from 4 to 7, you can imagine, even though you might get a little bit less per room, especially some of these smaller rooms, you can imagine that you're making a whole lot more cash flow when you do this sort of model. And that's really like these mogul properties. Let's take a look at them. Mafia, I think, is not too many. Yeah, it's a 7 bedroom, 2 bathroom, but that is, it's a lot of homes. Um, I think this is the biggest one that I have, which is the Rhodes. It's 10 bedrooms, 3 baths. It's only a 2,600 square foot home, right? I mean, it's not a ton of square feet to stick 10 bedrooms in, but that's all it is. It's bedrooms, kitchen, and that's it. So, like, these pictures are actually some of their before pictures. A lot of this open space that you see is turned into bedrooms. I found the floor plan somewhere online, but I don't think I have it anywhere handy. That's not what we're talking about doing here on this Alcott Street one. It's just renting the individual bedrooms. There's no proposal at the moment, to split out common areas and try to do um, something different with that, right? And so, okay, yeah, landlords can make way more money with this than with a traditional rental. So why aren't we just doing it with them, right? I think there's a couple of reasons. So what, kind of giving you, that you understand the reward, right? You make a lot more money for the same square footage, but the risks are, one, you might end up incurring some additional liability when there's issues between the tenants, right? When the tenants are fighting each other, if they have some, if there's something that somebody gets hurt in that instance, or if there's some real, serious problem between the tenants, you might get looped into that. Even if that's not what's happening, if there's just like minor disagreements, it becomes much more of a management headache. And so because of that, you have um, you have a harder time finding a manager. On this particular one, Earl's going to do it himself, and he's done that with, he has experience doing it in other properties as well. I believe he's doing it in the Hawaii property once he closes on that, but I'm sure I can't think of which ones, but he's definitely done this, where he's rented bedrooms in other places. Um, and so, understanding what, like, it's not just something that a traditional property manager will do for most people. People do hire Pad Split to help with that, but even when they do it, they will help track the tenants, sign the agreements, collect the rents, but they don't do any of like the property maintenance. They don't do the turnovers when you have someone moving out and someone else moving in. They don't do any, they don't handle any of that sort of actual, touching the property type work. And so, it ends up being much more work either for the co-owner or you have to find a property manager that will do it. Like I said, you have the additional risk of any sort of tenant liability where your inter-tenant relationships become a big issue and also just more headaches because of that. And then you also tend to have more turnover. Pad Split, when they started, the first time I ever talked to them, they talked about, oh, well, our average tenant stays about 9 months. But the last time I heard statistics, it was like 3 or 4 months, right? So in general, you have more transient tenants. They don't have to be. You can certainly get tenants that sign year leases, year-long leases for bedrooms. Um, it just tends to be that the people that are looking for a room to rent, as soon as they can afford something better, they typically will go ahead and do that, right? Excuse me. And so, you do you do just have those, sorry about that, have those more transient stays, and turnover can be expensive if you have marketing expenses, if you just have time where it's vacant, if you have to do touch-up paint. At least those turnovers are cheaper in that you're just painting, a single bedroom or cleaning a single bedroom. And so, that's some of the downside. In addition to that, you have to furnish them, right? And the furniture, uh, it can be pretty minimal relative to like if you're furnishing a short-term rental. Like, if you're furnishing a nice property that's a short-term rental, those can be really expensive. You want to use higher end stuff. You want to put a lot of cool things in. But for especially the pad split style ones where they're really going after some of the lowest income tenants for those units, they're typically not providing like really high end furniture or anything like that. It's a very sort of a sparse living arrangement. Um, they'll often just provide a bed in the bedroom, maybe a side table and a lamp, but nothing beyond that. They're not. A lot of times, they're not even putting any, dressers or anything. There isn't a common area where they're going to put any couches, and usually they don't put like some big dining set, but they might do like a couple little sitting areas, somewhere where people can sit and eat. But so it's the cost of doing those tend to be cheaper when it's the pad split style one. Um, for something like this one, you do have to furnish it just like it's a regular home. But again, it's not like over the top high end furnishing. On this particular one, Earl had mentioned that he had some furniture already that he'd be willing to just move out of his storage and into it. And then also, he mentioned he does a lot of thrifting and stuff. That's one of the reasons I like him, is because he's quite a hustler. As far as like him as someone to manage my properties that I want to invest in, is he's willing to just like get creative, do the work, find cheaper ways to do things, and and so that's it's a good example, right? He's not just ordering a full set of furniture off of Amazon, which I have seen people do for a short-term rental that they bought. But he's trying to get the stuff as cheaply as possible, but also works hard to provide a good experience. So anyway, I think I've probably said too many things about Earl today, so I'm going to try to stop that. But he's just the one that's that whole conversation about this particular property is what spawned this thought in my head today. Um, I took a couple notes. I want to make sure I'm just talking about everything. Yeah, and so one of the I already talked about the risks in general, but additional costs. Um, is just is the furnishing, but also the utilities. You're typically paying all the utilities, even the Wi-Fi, and your tenants just pay a flat either monthly or weekly fee, to occupy the units. And so sometimes depending on where the property is located, you might have a huge heating or cooling bill. You might have a water leak in there, or they're over using the water. And sometimes, I mean, you can have a huge water bill if you have a leak that goes unchecked, right? And so you have a little bit of extra, financial risk that comes from the not being able to control the utilities completely. Um, I think if you do these properties right, you don't really have to, it's a relatively small risk compared to the extra rent that you're getting, but it's not zero, right? And so it's something you have to think about. Like I said, it's if you're doing it well, right? If you're somebody who, uh, isn't great at controlling costs, doesn't really think about those things, you could very quickly get yourself in a position where you're renting by the room, you're doing a bunch of extra work, and you're making less money because you have poor insulation, 1950s windows, and like your AC is just running constantly, or your heater's running constantly. Um, and then also, you have the expense to put in the furnishings, but then also too to replace those over time. I don't think that's like, because it's not, that's a much bigger expense with short-term rentals because you have to keep things really nice, and you're trying to create those wow moments for people on vacations, where it's not the same sort of situation when you're doing by the room rentals. But it is something that's an expense that you eventually have to deal with. But again, I think on this particular one, this was a property. When he brought it up, I was like, I'd love it if he did that. I think it is a place that you can make a little bit of extra money. I'd expect it to work in a market like Denver. I would guess well, I know the affordability there is not fantastic, and so um, I'd assume he'd be able to get tenants for the rooms relatively quickly at a decent rate. Um, so I think this is one of the things. The only other thing that I didn't really look at this one, but becomes very important whenever you're doing, rent by the room, pad split style, and even just traditional rent by the room, is your parking becomes very important, right? Because if you're basically often going to have someone with a car for every bedroom in a property. Yeah, I thought I remember there being uh, plenty of parking at this property. I'm sure it's something that Earl's thought about here, but it is something, I always like to check on things like that, right? Yeah, there's parking here. I'm fairly certain there was parking in the back too, but also too, just street parking is perfectly fine, and there is, a decent amount of it. So that becomes important with these types of properties. But the other thing that is often too is, access to public transportation. Um, and let's see. I would guess that they have a bus stop somewhere near here, but I didn't go in and dig into this. Yeah, this is the first one I've noticed. Oh no, this one's even closer. So you do have them, very close. Uh, these are very easy walking distance from this location here, right? And so those are things that become important. The reason I didn't really even worry about it is I think Denver has at least this part of town is much denser than it becomes a problem in some parts of San Antonio, which is my market, and so we don't have the best public transit here, and sometimes it is a very long walk to wherever that bus stop is, and especially because it's hot at least 50% of the year here. It can become an issue. We actually really pay attention to, hey, where is that nearest bus stop? Is it just a couple minute walk? And then again, where's that parking? So there are different things to think about, but it's, you can tell just from the investments I've already made on Mogul and on Lofty, and there is one other one that I have on Lofty that is it's a condo that's doing by the room rentals, and anytime that they're doing it and they're making money doing it, I think I've been attracted to those types of deals as long as they have good cash on cash return, because you are taking a little bit more risk, so you want to see, in my mind, I want to see a little bit better return on those, right? But I think that over time, especially in the right markets, there's just going to be more and more demand. And so, being a first mover in those markets, having these established properties, is going to be helpful. One of the things, you sort of, if done well, can kind of create their own community. Whereas someone moves out, they know other people who might want to live there. Um, so I don't know. That's basically, like I said. I mean, I'm not the biggest expert on this type of this strategy, but I have seen it enough that I wanted to talk about it and really just explain why I'm attracted to this. It isn't just that it's giving you better yield, although these have been, I mean, like the roads has had an incredible yield, and I think I don't remember which one of these it was, but one of these two also had just well, both of them had very good yields, like going in, and their first month is already proven to be really good. So but it's not just that, right? I honestly believe, I think there's a strong need for it. Like, tenants are really looking for it. Um, it's also it's sort of a win-win. It's working for landlords as well, right? Because it's boosting their returns a little bit in a market where it's hard to be able to cover your debt. Um, and unfortunately, I don't see that changing anytime soon, right? Like, I don't we this trend, even though this stops in 2022. I don't think there's any, I think it'll be a while before there's any downward. Hopefully, it's not still just going straight up like that, but I think it'll be a while before we see that rental affordability uh, really starting to improve in most markets. So, yeah, I think that's all I want to talk about with that. I'm interested if you've bought into any of these style of properties, especially if it's any of the ones that I'm not in. I'd like to hear how you're doing. I didn't buy any of the prints. If you bought any of that one, that I'd be interested to hear. Um, but also too, if there are others on Lofty that are running that way that I'm not aware of, I'd like to hear about that. And I even on fractional.app, which I haven't been talking much about because I still haven't found many deals that I thought were even close for me, except for the one that I already covered. But they have a group on there that's talking about co-living and rent by the room. Um, I don't love the market they picked for it. I think one of the things that makes this strategy really great is that you can use it in markets that are uh, that are the prices are too high for traditional rentals. And so if I'm going to use this strategy, I want to use it to enter really strong markets that I want to be in, not to buy properties in places where you're already getting good rent to price ratios on traditional rentals. That seems a little bit of backwards thinking to me. But anyway, um, yeah, we're really starting to see it everywhere. So if there are other places that you've invested in these types of deals, please feel free to share that in the comments or jump in our Discord and talk about it there as well. That's everything for today. Until next time, I am going to so that you don't have to. Yeah, you could tell that so there was a mistake right there, right? Like I just had some problem. I'm going to get better with this recording stuff and also be a little bit less of a lame YouTuber. I'm working on it and getting there. Uh, yeah, now that's really it though. So see you tomorrow.